So what you see, for instance, here in this figure C over here is basically platinum, which is patterned, ITO, which is patterned, sitting on top of platinum, which is sitting on top of your silicon substrate. Now, on top of this, if you spin coat and cure PDMS, and you peel it off, because like I mentioned earlier, the platinum is not stuck very well to the silicon, you can essentially just peel off the entire device off the silicon surface. So when you flip it over, what you're left behind with is a platinum on top, the indium tin oxide kind of semi-embedded in the PDMS and a little bit sitting on top, and the PDMS as a substrate. Now you can then use a dry etching step, get rid of your platinum, and at the end of it, what you're left behind is with your indium tin oxide devices sitting on your silicone rubber or your polymeric substrate. Now, this can be, you can either microfabricate these or you can nanofabricate these. So you don't have to only stick to photolithography. What you see over here are very high resolution patterns which have been nanofabricated using an electron beam lithography system. So no matter whether you use nanostructures or microstructures, the same transfer process can be used to actually effectively transfer oxide films onto a silicone rubber platform. And we've tried this over up to around a 4-inch diameter silicon wafer, and we get a 100% transfer rate and repeatability across the entire diameter of the silicon wafer. So you can maintain the resolution and also have high repeatability. So we were quite happy with the results. We thought, okay, we managed to get an oxide layer which has been transferred onto silicone. And we were wondering now what happens if we actually apply strain on these materials. Now, typically an oxide layer is not going to withstand anything more than say 2 or 3% of strain. You would not really see much performance beyond that. So we are quite surprised when we could stretch these to up to around 12 or 15% and still manage to get some performance out of them. Beyond a particular percentage, like 15%, they kind of become open circuit, which is why you don't really see much performance. But then once you again bring it back to 0% of strain, you are able to keep using these particular devices. So this was really, really early stage measurements. But then after that, we kind of improved on the recipe. You could get much more stretchability as you kept doing other materials. So we were quite fascinated, and we were trying to understand how is it that an oxide layer, which typically cracks and is brittle at 2 or 3% of strain, is actually able to withstand much higher strain limits. And when we looked at the indium tin oxide material under a microscope, we realized it's no longer just a continuous thin film. What you almost have now are kind of plates. So the indium tin oxide material is kind of looking like overlapping plates, which are sitting on top of each other. And then once you look at it, you kind of realize intuitively what's happening when you apply strain. So when you're applying strain, you have the plates sliding apart from each other, but still maintaining electrical contact. But when you apply too much strain and they lose the electrical contact, that's when you lose the performance. But then once you let go of it, once again, they go and slide back on each other, and you again get back to your original state in some sense. So this is the reason you're able to apply strain up to around, say, 12 or 15% and still actually maintain the electrical contact and the performance of these materials. So our devices actually look like pretty much like what's seen on that in those images over there. So you can see the lady handling those devices, and that's pretty much what the devices look like. So a thin silicone rubber, which is a contact lens type material, and you can have your oxide layers on top of it. You can also have metal layers on top of it, making contact to your oxide layers, and your entire device is therefore on this thin polymeric platform. We were quite excited when we created that back in 2016, and we actually patented the transfer process and the entire process. And that allowed us to have a lot of conversations with industry to see how we can actually use this transfer process and use this particular way of making devices and use it for practical applications. Now, what I showed you was zinc oxide, indium tin oxide, but then we also thought, let's not stop at indium tin oxide. Let's see if this process can be used for other oxide layers as well. Now, this slide here shows you the process we use for creating zinc oxide on PDMS devices. It's exactly the same process. Nothing has changed in this case, except for the fact, using zinc oxide instead of indium tin oxide. So again, platinum as a transfer layer, and you can microfabricate it, nanofabricate it, or just transfer an entire thin film of zinc oxide over. So same process, it works for zinc oxide as well. Now with zinc oxide, you can demonstrate quite a few different applications because it's quite a versatile sensing material. So in this particular case, what you see here are gas sensors, which actually are capable of operating at room temperature. So typically gas sensors operate at much more elevated temperatures, but in this case, you can see we can actually get sensing performance of these zinc oxide gas sensors at room temperature itself. So you have a test chamber, and what you're essentially doing is you're monitoring the changes in the resistance in the material as you're exposing it to the gas. So they're conductometric gas sensors. The resistance of the material changes on exposure to the gas. Now with zinc oxide, you can either use nitrogen dioxide or hydrogen. One is an oxidizing gas, one is a reducing gas, and you can see the differences in the way the gas sensor is responding to it. You can apply some strain and you're not losing significantly on the performance when it comes to these gas sensing properties. You can also use zinc oxide as a UV sensor. So if you take the transmission characteristics of zinc oxide, you will find it's really sensitive to in the UV region of the spectrum. And you can see over here, it performs exceedingly well as a UV sensor as well. So it kind of almost reacts in a matter of seconds. And then it recovers in a matter of seconds. Once again, you can see very good sensing performance, and we were able to actually kind of understand that the reason the sensing performance of these materials is so high is because of that the very rough surface which you have. So, the surface of where you have the overlapping plates that offers very high surface roughness, and that in turn translates to a much higher and much better sensing performance. So as you can see, the zinc oxide on PDMS has a much better sensing performance compared to, say, the same zinc oxide on other platforms where you don't have that high surface roughness. So this table here, for instance, shows you the surface roughness which we can get on PDMS. And that's pretty much the same reason why the gas sensors also work at room temperature. It's the surface roughness aspects of it, which kind of lends to better sensing performance. And the other aspect for the gas sensors also fact it's a PDMS-based platform. So PDMS is gas sensitive, is gas permeable, which means there's much more gas interacting with the sensor and you get better sensing performance. Now, more recently, we also demonstrated nicotine sensors. Now, this was an outcome of a conversation with a potential industry partner where they were really keen to understand if you can have a wearable sitting on your skin, which is able to pick up nicotine. So we're looking specifically at nicotine and not at cigarette smoke, because you also have vaping, which is of which is increasing. And so the key aspect for both cigarette smoke as well as for vape, the key component which they both share is nicotine. So these are sensors which this was recently published just earlier in the year or late last year. And as you can see now, we also managed to make this entire technology a wireless and a wearable technology. So this particular device, which you see on this person's skin, is actually communicating using NFC, so near field communication technologies. And we use vanadium dioxide in this particular case as a conductometric sensor, which is sensitive to nicotine. So you can see the graph on the right, which shows you the performance of these nicotine sensors in a lab. And also it shows it to you in real life circumstances. So if you're out on a street and you have somebody vaping in a close proximity to you, you can see the sensing performance and how the sensor then naturally just recovers once that source of nicotine has disappeared. And then it continues to again sense every time, there's exposure to nicotine. Now you can, because it's NFC, you can easily have an app which you can use to communicate to this particular device and get the readings of the sensor off onto your mobile phone, for instance, to get that value. I'll shift focus now and slightly move to a different topic, which is again keeping oxides as the core of the sensing platform, but we're looking to use oxides and use them for biomarker sensing. So in this particular case, this was a project which kind of came to us more from an industry perspective. So the ask in this particular case was we have body fluids beyond blood in our body. So say, for instance, you're looking at saliva or you're looking at sweat. Now, typically you do a blood test, and the blood test, you analyze the biomarkers in your blood test, and that gives you an indication of your health. So say, for instance, you have had a heart attack, you go into the hospital and they do a blood test, they find certain biomarkers in your body are much more elevated, and that tells you that you've had a heart attack episode. But the truth is the biomarkers don't just go high on the day of the heart attack. It's actually a very slow progress by which the biomarkers are slowly increasing. So as your risk for cardiovascular disease or for stroke slowly increases, the biomarkers or concentration is also increasing in your saliva or your sweat or your other body fluids. So if you can have a mechanism by which you can actually sense how much biomarkers are present in your body fluids over a period of time. That will kind of give you an indication of the risk factors for you for cardiovascular disease or diabetes or for stroke. So imagine you can use a body fluid like saliva or sweat, and you can use that within 5 minutes, you can get an understanding of your risk factors for any of these particular diseases. That was pretty much the ask which we had from industry. Can we develop a biosensor which within 5 minutes can selectively tell you for specific biomarkers what your risk factors are? So we again use a conductometric approach in this particular case. So we have zinc oxide on a silicon platform, and we're using the zinc oxide sensors to actually do this biomarker sensing. But we also do other steps before you can just directly use it to sense the biomarker. So the first step being we salinize the surface of the zinc oxide, and that is just to make sure that when we attach the antibodies on top of it, they orient themselves the right way. Now, once the antibodies are immobilized and attached on top of the salinized surface, and then later on when they are actually exposed to the antigens bind to the antibody and a charge transfer happens. And that charge transfer causes a change in the conductometric properties of your zinc oxide, which is what you measure as the sensor response. So what you see is what you might sell as a product would be something like this, which is basically the antibody immobilized device, which has a base resistance. The minute a body fluid with the antigens is basically impinged on that particular surface, you have a change in resistance which you measure. And there's also possibly the aspect of reusing this device, which we are still studying. So is this a one-off sensor? Can we reuse the sensor? That's something which we're still looking at, but this is basically mainly the sensing aspects of it. So say for instance, in this particular slide, you can see two examples. So one of them, on the one on the left is IL-6, which is interleukin-6, and the one on the right is CRP, which is C-reactive protein. Now, these are pretty common biomarkers in our body, which are indicative of cardiovascular disease or stroke. So you can see over here, you have healthy levels, and you also have elevated levels. So we're trying to understand, how sensitive are these sensors, and in terms of how well they can pick up the healthy levels of IL-6 or CRP in sweat or in saliva, and how low or how high they can go. So that was what we were trying to pick up initially. And then you're also, when it comes to sensors, you're also interested in selectivity. So the sensor on the left is actually an IL-6 sensor, whereas the one on the right is being made for CRP sensing. So you can see if you have a mixture of many different biomarkers, it will still very selectively pick out the IL-6 in it. And if you have a mixture of other biomarkers, the CRP sensor is selective and only picks out the CRP and reacts specifically for the CRP. So that's just a test to make sure that the sensor remains selective among the many other biomarkers which are present in our body fluids. So that was a platform approach which we developed, which was more to pick up biomarkers in the body. And as I said, again, that's kind of a platform device, because you can easily imagine, people using this for a variety of biomarkers, or for viruses, or for, early detection of DNA, and for cancer and things like that. So those are some of the other areas we are looking at using that kind of an approach. The third aspect in the presentation today is where I'm going to be looking at electronic skin. So for a long time, whenever people talk about wearables or stretchables, the term which always comes up is electronic skin. So, people always imagine you can wear, wearable on your skin, and can you have it, it almost becomes one with your skin. You don't feel yourself wearing it. But for us, I guess we want to take it one step further and see if we can actually mimic the properties of skin using these particular electronic devices. Now, you might have seen this. So last year, for instance, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine was actually awarded to these two prominent people. And the reason they were awarded the Nobel Prize was for the discovery of receptors for temperature and touch. So what that means is your skin, as you know, is sensitive to a variety of stimuli. Now, the image on your right shows you the various aspects of your skin. You can see that your skin has thermoreceptors, it has various corpuscles, it has nociceptors. Each of it is responsible for sensing different stimuli on our body. So this Nobel Prize was for the medical discovery and of understanding how our skin actually reacts to all those stimuli, and how our skin is actually sensitive to all those stimuli. Fantastic piece of research, and we were really pleased that is what kind of formed the core for us to understand about how our skin actually senses all these different organs, and then therefore can we electronically mimic the same perspective? Can we electronically create an equivalent which is also sensitive to temperature, which is also sensitive to pain, or which is also sensitive to pressure? One important thing to note here, though, is skin is not the only thing which is doing all the hard work. It's the skin along with the nervous system, which is talking to the brain. The entire sequence of it is what is responsible for sensing. So it's not enough if you just mimic the skin. You almost need to mimic the entire system of where the skin is communicating through the nervous system to the brain, and your skin does not react to all stimuli. We only react to certain stimuli, and our brain makes a decision in terms of which stimuli are worth reacting to and which are those stimuli you don't react to as much. So in some ways, we have to make sure that we mimic the entire journey. It's not just mimicking the sensing aspects on the skin alone. Now, to mimic the brain aspects of it, we have been doing research in our group for quite a while, and we work on what are called memristive devices. So memristors are basically elements which again kind of mimic the brain activity. So what you can do is you can almost see the synonyms in this particular case. So you have the synaptic gap, and you have the two nerve endings. What we do is almost mimic the same thing. So the two nerve endings are mimicked using metal pads, and the synaptic gap and the way in which information is passed through that synaptic gap is mimicked using an oxide layer. So it's the oxygen vacancies in that oxide layer which are basically transferring the information across the two nerve endings, if I can put the equivalent of that. It's quite a complex topic, so I'm not going to cover, how the artificial memory aspects or the memristors work. I'll let you go and read up more on it, or feel free to email me later for a further discussion. But what we essentially did was that we have the memristor, which was mimicking the brain aspects, and we also have sensors which are mimicking the thermoreceptor aspects or the Pacinian corpuscles aspect of the skin. So we put these two together to make sure we can mimic the entire aspect of the electronic skin. So what you see over here is this, for instance, is mimicking the pressure sensing aspects of the skin, and this is mimicking the temperature sensing aspects of the skin. And in both cases, you have the memristor, which is connected to it, which turns on or off and sends you signals based on when or when not to react to certain stimuli. So the first aspect of it is where you have the Pacinian corpuscle. So the Pacinian corpuscle is actually the one which reacts to pressure. So for instance, if you look at your fingertips, you'll find that it's very similar to, they have loads of Pacinian corpuscles where they react to pressure which is being applied on top of them. So in this particular case, we had a pressure sensor connected up to the memristive aspects of it. And as you can see, the circuit diagrams on the right-hand side. It doesn't really react when there's no pressure on it, and the brain only kicks in and starts reacting, or the memristor component is activated only when sufficient pressure is actually being applied on top of the pressure sensor. So that aspect of it actually mimics the way our skin senses pressure. Our skin is also sensitive to temperature. So that's the thermoreceptors in our skin, which actually do the hard job of sensing, temperature aspects. And again, there is a speed aspect to it as well. So for instance, if you touch a cold surface, you don't react as strongly as you react when you touch a very hot surface. So in this particular case, again, we used vanadium dioxide as the thermoreceptor. Now, vanadium dioxide is a fascinating material because it's actually a phase change material. So what happens when you heat up vanadium dioxide is beyond a particular temperature of around 65 degrees centigrade, it goes from being an insulator to a conductor. So you can see the resistivity of the material significantly drops once it reaches a phase change temperature of 67 degrees. And once you cool it down, it again goes back to being an insulator at room temperature. So it has this fascinating property where it changes from being an insulator to a conductor. And that's the property we actually used to make it mimic the thermoreceptive characteristics of the skin. So what you see is, once again, we put that along with a memristor. So you can see the circuit diagrams over here. As long as the temperatures are low, you don't really see any kind of response from the thermoreceptor. But once the temperature hits the threshold of 68 degrees centigrade, the memristive aspect of it turns on, or the brain aspect of it turns on, and you start seeing a response from the thermoreceptor. The final aspect of the skin is a little more complex because what we're talking here is nociceptors. So nociceptors is the way by which our skin receives and reacts to pain. So, when I first put this out, people said you don't sense pain, you feel pain. It's kind of true. You don't really sense pain, you feel pain. But how do you know? And again, there it's quite complex in terms of you don't feel pain all the time. The brain only allows you to feel pain in order to protect yourself. And even that happens only beyond a particular threshold. So in this particular case, again, we use vanadium dioxide, we use the memristors, which are made of strontium titanate, and we use the non-linear aspects of it to mimic the pain sensing capabilities of our skin. Now, one interesting thing which we also mimicked in this particular case was you have conditions in your skin which are called as allodynia or hyperalgesia. So what they actually mean is normal skin might behave like this, but then your allodynia is when you start feeling pain even when the stimulus is not too high. So normally we react to pain sometimes, but say if your skin is damaged, if you have sunburnt skin, your pain threshold will shift. Hyperalgesia is where you feel extreme pain when even when you're not supposed to be, have that level of pain. So having extreme pain condition is hyperalgesia. Having a very low threshold for pain is allodynia. And using this particular vanadium dioxide strontium titanate, we can actually mimic those kind of skin characteristics as well. So the ability to control the threshold at which pain occurs in our skin is something which we're able to demonstrate using this particular platform. So why did we do all this? What is the use of creating an electronic skin? In some ways, for us, it was a means by which we can think of a world where you can have a skin like this on top of prosthetics. So prosthetics have certainly significantly enhanced people's lives by means of which you can actually now hold things and you can grasp things. And for people who don't have the access to the limbs, the prosthetics enhances their quality of life. But imagine if you can add a layer of skin on top of this and push up that quality of life even higher and make it much more limb-like. So that was one of the things which we had in mind when we actually created the electronic skin concept. Or for people who have sunburned skin, or for people who have are burns victims, again, is it a possibility where you can have some kind of electronic skin which will augment the skin's and replicate the skin's characteristics? I'll leave the fundamental aspects of the research over there, and I'm just going to focus the last few slides on talking about our industry collaborations. We are fortunate to work with quite a few industry partners over here. Many of the companies we work with are predominantly startups, but it's pretty early age research in the sense the world of wearables and the world of nearables is quite young and new. And so a lot of these are, very early devices which are used mainly in the healthcare and in the aged care space. You can see some of the examples I've shared here on this particular page. So the first one, for instance, is where you have a patch sitting on your skin, which is monitoring your interstitial fluid. So just as how you have blood, saliva, and sweat, you have interstitial fluid, which is running just below your skin. And once again, that interstitial fluid has a lot of valuable information about your body. So this patch has a microneedle patch, which is capable of investigating your interstitial fluid and understand a lot of things which are happening inside your body. So we developed this initially as a personalized diet and a personalized medicine tool. So you can either understand the distribution of drugs or how drugs have been absorbed in our body, or you can look at glucose levels. So trying to understand how your glucose levels spike based on the food which you're taking in. So I'm trying to understand how your diet is impacting your body in some sense. The second thing which you see over there is a patch which we're developing with an industry partner for aged care health and for infection intervention. Now, typically for people within residentially aged care homes, you're trying to constantly monitor their skin temperature, their ECG, or their oxygen levels, and try and understand their health parameters. It's quite disruptive. So imagine if you're constantly having to keep taking away these people and constantly keep attaching wires onto them and understand what their skin temperature is like, what their ECG is like. This can be replaced by a patch. So imagine if those people can just go about their life as they normally go about. You have a patch or a band-aid like thing sitting on their skin. And whenever you need information from that patch, all you need to do is bring a phone close to it and get the readings of them. Or you can use Bluetooth on this patch, and therefore, the information is constantly communicated and stored on the cloud through the Bluetooth aspects of the particular device. So the example which you see over there is actually a 3-lead ECG device. So instead of having a 12-lead ECG, which is attached onto you, this is a small ECG device which we manufactured and prepared, which can be used to actually get your ECG data in a wearable format. Now, this It's pretty exciting research because it is an industry project we've had for, I think, a little over 1.5 years. And these patches are actually under trial in the UK right now, where they're actually trying them in residential aged care homes to see if they can use them for infection as well as health interventions. We have patches which can measure skin temperature and also patches which can measure ECG. And that will give you a pretty good understanding of, a person's health in a residential aged care home. The third one over here is actually for eye health. So for people who have dry eye diseases, now a lot of us suffer from dry eyes. More often than not, what they ask you to do when you have dry eyes is go and put a few drops. But for some people, dry eye disease can be quite extreme. And in those extreme cases, what people need is constant application of warmth as well as application of pressure to actually help them alleviate the dry eyes disease symptoms. So these are patches which we are developing with another company called Enthalmic, and where we're trying to look at seeing if we can have these patches sitting on your eyes, both on the upper and the lower eyelids. And if these patches can deliver the heat as well as deliver the pressure required to alleviate dry eyes disease symptoms. So again, early stage collaborations, but you can see how wearable patches can be used for so many different applications. And the last one is related directly to the biomarker work, which I presented earlier. So having the ability to have sensors which can detect the presence of biomarkers from body fluids within a 5 to 10 minute time span. So that can be used in a variety of ways. So it could be a toothbrush, which you're every day you're brushing, and at that time you're collecting the saliva, and that is measuring the biomarkers which could be present for cardiovascular disease or for stroke. Or it could be something which is collecting a sweat on your skin and therefore analyzing the biomarkers. Or it could be looking at virus load in breath. So we are still not completely past the pandemic, but imagine if you have a sensor patch which is stuck somewhere in the walls of the office wall, and that is able to pick up the viral loads from the breath analysis, and therefore let you know if there's presence of COVID or presence of other flu viruses which might be present in the air around you. So that's again one of the other industry partners we're working with for biomarkers as well as for virus detection. The final couple of slides, and this is probably our most one of the industry projects which are very first industry projects. And the reason I'm presenting this is we come from a world of research where our thought process is pretty much we microfabricate and make small sensors. How can we take these sensors and how can we actually upscale them and use them in real life? This was actually, believe it or not, our first industry partnership, because this was where it was not microfabricated, it was not nanofabricated. This is where the partner came to us and said, can you make sensors which can go into bedding products? So can you have sensors which go across an entire mattress? And then can we use those mattress sensors to actually pick up the person's presence, position, or posture overnight in bed? So here there are quite a few people in residential aged care homes. And the only way you know if the person is in bed or not in bed is actually people go and open the door and check on them every now and then to make sure that they are in bed. Falls is a big risk. So falls prevention is something which people are very, very keen about. So if you can have an array of sensors on the mattress, and that can actually pick up if the person is in bed or not in bed, are they at the risk of falling out of bed? Have they got up to go and visit the restroom and it's been 20 minutes and they're still not back? These are all the valuable pieces of information, which is really valuable for the person who's giving them care during the course of the night. And that allows them to make much better decisions and provide a better quality of care. So this was one of our very first industry projects. And we actually launched this as a product almost at a similar time last year. So it's a product called Remy, which is actually an array of sensors which are manufactured on a mattress. It's actually the sensors are present on a mattress protector. So what that does is essentially pick up that it's a person on the bed, pick up their presence, pick up their position, and also their posture. So are they lying down on their side or are they on the back? Are they at the edge of the mattress? Are they in bed? These are some of the early things which we can pick up using Remy. But it's also extremely sensitive mattress sensors, which can also pick up breathing patterns. So we're not started looking at that in detail yet, but in due course of time, you can also pick up other things in terms of heart rate, their breathing patterns. And so you get a much better understanding of the person in bed and what their health parameters might be. So this is again going into trials into aged care homes pretty much in the next few weeks or to a month. And we're looking to see if we can, how this will actually truly transform the way care is delivered in these residential aged care facilities. I cannot finish up without acknowledging my fantastic team. So almost all the work I presented today was done by this very motivated and highly collaborative team of researchers. We have a very diverse team which we lead over here, and very proud of them. And especially through a pandemic, to stay motivated and keep working through all these research goals, and to keep ticking all those goals is something which they do phenomenally every day. So kudos to all of them, and extremely proud to lead the research group. And all the funding partners, without whom obviously none of this would exist. So be it the Australian Research Council, who fund a lot of the fundamental aspects of the work, or some of the more niche grant schemes which fund the work where we are working more closely with industry to translate and commercialize our technologies. Again, a big thank you to the funding partners. And thank you once again for this invitation to come and speak to you and talk about our research. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Madhu. It's one of the excellent presentation, right? And now the forum is open for questions.
Yeah, Professor Madhu Bhaskaran, it was a good piece of lecture. Am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to ask you whether I was a little bit excited about the room temperature sensitivity of zinc oxide based sensors.
Yes.
Which you were trying to correlate to the surface roughness.
Yes.
Now, how surface roughness translates to more sensitivity? Could you please throw a little bit more light on that?
It's a good question. From what I've seen, it's basically, now there are other sensors which also potentially work at room temperature for gas sensing. But if you look at those, they're essentially like nanoflowers, or the zinc oxide grown by hydrothermal growths. So again, in there, what you again see as a characteristic is very high surface roughness. So it's not a thin film, it's not just a uniform material. You have a lot more surface where gas can basically interact with that sample. And so that surface area enhancement is actually kind of proportional to the amount of gas interacting with the sample. So you have gas interacting with a lot more area in the sample, and that's what kind of translates to a higher sensitivity, is how I understand it. And because in our case we also have PDMS as a substrate, you have gas basically interacting with the sample from the bottom as well. So because PDMS is gas permeable, you're not blocked off the gas from one end. You have gas interacting with the sample from behind as well as from above. So once again, in some ways, a larger surface area is correlated back into the sensing performance.
And one more thing, you were mentioning about the specificity of CRL and IL6 of
yes.
your surface modified. So what could be the detection limit of this CRL and IL6? Would it be picomolar or femtomolar?
It is, I think from memory, it is 10 picomolar. But we've also tested femtomolar in some cases, and it does work for femtomolar for some cases. But since I think repeatability and to be very confident, I would say more of picomolar.
Thank you, and best wishes for your work.
Thank you very much.
There is a question in the chat box. In place of ITO PDMS, you have used zinc oxide PDMS. Whether the zinc oxide is a doped one, it is asked by Dr. SM30.
Sorry, I didn't get the last part of it. Are you asking the zinc oxide is doped?
Yeah.
Okay. No, in this particular case, the zinc oxide is not doped. So far, we have done the transfer process with indium tin oxide. We've done zinc oxide. We've done molybdenum trioxide, vanadium dioxide, and titanium dioxide. I think we tried tin oxide as well, and I think that worked as well. So to be honest, it's not limited by that. So if you need to dope the zinc oxide for any particular application, there's no particular reason why it shouldn't work. It should work no matter what the particular oxide layer is on top of it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Dr. Arul, I think 2 more questions are there in the Q&A. Can you check the Q&A, please, or shall I read it? Does thickness of ITO flake film affect microtectonic effect study?
Thank you. We've done films starting from 50 nanometers up to around 200 nanometers, and it does not seem to make a difference in terms of how thick it is. what influences the microtectonics or how much strain you can apply on it is actually how much you can pattern these surfaces. So say if you nano pattern these surfaces, you can actually stretch them a lot more because your amount of oxide layer which is present and the amount of PDMS which is surrounding the oxide is much more. So you can actually withstand a lot more strain if you nano pattern these oxides. So you can go up to around 25 or 30% of strain if you nano pattern them. If you don't pattern them and you're just doing a continuous thin film layer, it withstands probably only around 5 to 7%. If you micro pattern them, then around 12 or 15%. So it's the patterning and the size of the patterning which influences it more. Thickness 50 to 200 nanometers, not so much difference.
How far electronic skin support natural sweating process?
I don't know the answer to that one. It's a good question. It's a good question. We haven't really studied the water permeability aspects of PDMS, or how sweat is going to influence its characteristics. Good one.
Professor Madhu, it was an excellent talk, superb, and hats off to you for the kind of work that you do, especially for the geriatric patients. I have two observations, and quickly let me ask you.
Sure.
I saw one of your zinc oxide based slide that is on NOx as well as on hydrogen sensor,
Yes.
where I could see that there is a difference in the response depending on the 5% strain or no strain.
Yep.
And the effect is opposite. Like if I understand correct, for one of the gases it increases, the other gases it decreases. So does it make any sense? I mean, what basically goes there?
From memory, I don't think the effect was actually opposite. We do lose performance every time when you strain it. So I think you can still see my slides, and if you can see there, you lose performance with strain. You're not necessarily gaining on performance. The sensitivity is definitely dropping with strain.
It is dropping only. Sorry,
Yes.
my observation.
That's okay.
Sorry. Then one more thing, that vanadium oxide that you use it for the nicotine purpose.
Yes.
Can you just elaborate on the mechanism of how it picks up the nicotine, and what it does again the change in conductivity only, or?
Yes. So with vanadium dioxide, we first tested it. Again, we were pretty keen to understand selectivity. So we made sure that it was selective more to nicotine and not to other gases. So for instance, the interesting thing, I would love to send you the paper, and that has the details on the selectivity studies as well. And we also did some DFT modeling in that particular case to actually understand how the nicotine molecule is actually binding with the vanadium dioxide, and therefore, how it's causing a change in the conductometric aspects of it. So it's again a conductometric sensor, but it's predominantly due to the binding of the nicotine with the vanadium dioxide, and that's what is causing the changes in the conductometric properties.
No, do you use any surface modifier on the vanadium oxide to ensure that it binds?
No. In the case of the gas sensing, no.
No receptor. No receptor.
No.
Okay, good. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Considering the time constraint, we are stopping the Q&A session now. Thank you, Professor Madhu, for the exciting lecture today and being part of World Sensor Congress 2022. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Now we are moving to our next session and next speaker, Dr. Karun Malhotra, and he is the Managing Director of Murata Business Engineering India Private Limited. This company is, with its office at Hyderabad, was established in January 2017, and it's owned, it's subsidiary for Murata Manufacturing Company Limited, Japan. And it's one of the world's largest company for passive electronic components, wireless modules, and sensor manufacturing. And Dr. Malhotra has engaged himself as a bridge between Japanese and Indian companies as part of Make in India program via his own independent company in Japan. And his key words for creating new business are find, connect, and grow. And for Murata especially, he is focusing more on energy management, energy storage, and affordable healthcare device development for mass population. And he is very active in bridging the power electronics manufacturing ecosystem from Japan to India. And with the very visionary scientists and industrialists we have today, and I welcome Dr. Karun Malhotra for delivering his lecture. Dr. Malhotra, over to you.
Hello?
Yes, sir. We are able to listen you.
Okay.
Please share your slides.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I think I have to go to share my screen and can you see my slides?
Yes, sir. Perfect.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to this talk. I think after listening to the two very good presentations, very technical ones, I must probably, admit right up front that I have graduated from the R&D aspects of all this industry, and now focusing as mainly on setting up new businesses and business models. And I think as so I've been in Japan for very long now, and have basically come to India, as mentioned, for the Make in India program to establish some kind of an electronic industry base here. So my presentation is certainly not going to be technical, although I am a hardcore engineer, but I mean, it's not going to be technical. And it's going to be pretty much India specific, more, I think, a presentation which is more on lines of some management and policies, and focusing on the issues we have at hand. And that is that how do we set up an advanced tertiary manufacturing industry in India, especially in the field of electronics. And well, right now I am, heading the business creation arm of Murata Manufacturing Company Limited, based out of Kyoto, Japan. Murata is the world's largest manufacturer of electronic component modules. I think there is probably no company in the world that doesn't use our products. And I'm sure that most of you are familiar with the company. But it is, again, as I said, a 75 years old company, very profitable. I'll come to that point a little later on. But just to give you a brief introduction, that I'm based out of Kyoto, and Kyoto is, not only the cultural and the capital of Japan, and one of the most famous cities around the world, but it is also the headquarters of some of the most innovative and most profitable companies anywhere in the world. You have companies like Murata, you have Nippon Densan, Omron, Kyocera, Nintendo, Rome, Horiba, and the total output of these industries in Kyoto itself is over 85 billion US dollars, and probably the only companies which profits of exceeding about 15-16 billion dollars. So, I mean, it sort of relates to the talk I'll be giving. I mean, as I move on, that why are these companies successful, and what do we need to do to bring this success to India? So, since the topic today is sensors, sensors are and have been ubiquitous. I mean, evolution has basically, has perfected sensors. And as Professor Bhaskar also, there was a very, very interesting talk on the artificial skin and all. If you really look at, and all the time we are trying to go and mimic like the normal biological processes which evolution has designed for us. So I mean, I mean, that is the holy grail. In fact, I mean, so for some of you car enthusiasts, like there's a car company called Subaru, and their system of all assistance is based on pure optical. They call it eyesight. And the philosophy behind that is it's a very powerful system, is that, if the humans can see it, then that's how the car should see it. So they don't rely on too many of the other kind of sensors, but if you are driving in heavy rain, and if you can't see it, then the sensor won't see it, and it reacts accordingly. Anyway, so basically, I mean, sensors have underwritten evolution, and but we are probably don't have that much time for evolution, so we'll have to live in the real world and see how we can best design sensors. And again, I think since all of you are very familiar with sensors, but just to quickly go through, like even a normal everyday car is full of sensors, and probably more than we even realize. So this is what we have in a car, and this is like the sensors in a smartphone. And since we're talking of Murata, and any normal or any smartphone you hold today has over 1,100 components from Murata itself. And so that is the magnitude of the penetration of sensors. So a quick thing on Murata sensor lineup. Again, all this information is available on the website, and I'm not going to go into any technical details. As I said, my presentation is going to really focus on the policies and some of the issues at hand. So the Murata sensors, well, there's a sensor lineup. If you break it up into different, applications or principles, that in motion inertial force, you have the combined gyro sensor and accelerometer, then tilt detection and acceleration detection, impact detection, mechatronics, actuators. You have magnetic detectors, AMR switch, TMR linear angular sensors, object detection, ultrasonic sensors, human detection, PID, infrared sensors, energy current sensors, surge protection, some examples, the positive temperature coefficient thermistors we call posistors, that's a trademark. And environment, you have the negative temperature, positive PTC thermistors, soil sensors. In environment now we are coming up with CO2 sensors, air sensors. So basically a whole lineup of sensors. The applications of these, again, I think already Professor Bhaskar, she gave a very good overview. And same thing here, sensors for wearable devices. Our sensors, go into smartwatches. Anything from crystal oscillators, batteries, camera, LED, temperature compensation, mobile signal line protection. These are AMI filters, and health management by body surface temperature monitoring. Same thing, where atmospheric pressure sensors, altimeters, and also these are all manufactured in-house. Sensors for healthcare, that's one area. If you go onto our website, we are very strong in wireless modules and components, but the next big area where we are going is into healthcare. So Murata is really focusing a lot, developing a lot of sensors for healthcare. And again, all the kind of different kind of equipments you see here. In fact, one of the, not exactly a sensor, but using some of these principles of piezoelectric, which is like what Professor Kano was talking about. We have developed the world's smallest blower, which is probably the size of an American quarter. And that's the reason, one of the reasons why you have this blood pressure meters, which can be used on the wrist, because the motors are driven by these kind of special kind of, these motors are piezoelectric based, very small, and the blowers, sorry. Yeah. Okay. So same thing now with the sensors for IoT. We have air pressure sensors, ultrasonic sensors, infrared, so and so. So basically sensors for everything. And my talk today, the title was Sensors for Everyone. So, I say here the key for success, again, as I mentioned up front, that, my talk is going to primarily focus on the needs for India and the Indian industry. So what do we need to do to establish a sensor manufacturing industry? In fact, not only sensors, industry for a lot of electronics, or right now, the fashion of the day is now lithium batteries or whatever. There is a whole lot of, products which we really need to get into, start manufacturing, including semiconductors. And, we have a lot of good research going on. We always take pride in, that we make our own components and something, which go into space rockets for ISRO or, defense applications. But what do we have to show for commercial success? I think, our labs are there with very talented scientists, but what we lack is the commercialization of such products. So first thing is what to make. I start off, saying have a vision. When in Japan, I used to attend the CTO monthly meeting, which was held under the auspices of the Japanese cabinet. And we used to always sort of wonder, like, okay, how do we re-energize Japan? And everything that came, and the first thing that came out of the meeting was that technology doesn't win business. It is the business models that win business. So in many cases, in Japan and Japanese universities and Japanese industries have very, very good technology, but they still lose in business. So why is that? Well, there has to be a matching of seeds and needs, but you need to first have a big canvas. You need to have a vision. So let's now look at that vis-a-vis India. So what do we now? We're talking of healthcare. I'm going to focus on healthcare for now. Let's look at the facts. The healthcare per capita spend on healthcare in the US is $10,500, which translates to over about $3.4 trillion is spent on healthcare, a total of everything, of course, in the US, which is more than the entire GDP of India. And it is the highest in the advanced country at 17% of GDP. The number is about $3,700 for Japan, which is 9% of GDP, which is pretty much in line with UK and other OECD countries. In India, it is $100. And I think even that's a little overstated, and maybe 4 or 5% of the GDP. Now let's look at the number of hospital beds per million people. USA has 2,900, Japan has 13,000, India has 500, even Sub-Saharan Africa has 1,200 beds per million people. So, what do we do? We can come up with a lot of schemes and all, but there needs to be a vision. Now, this, could be a vision at a national level or at any level. So this is the vision, our means, that Murata Business Engineering India's vision, like how can we contribute to India? So now we start off with a vision. We say, okay, the first thing is that we should be able to provide the same level of healthcare as enjoyed by advanced countries to all Indians, let's say by 2045. When we started on this vision, we said, okay, let's take 25 years to achieve that. How do we achieve that? And then there should be some target. Now, this is not an officially authorized target or something. Okay, let's say $1,000 or less per capita would be a good number, where we provide the same level of healthcare as the US, Japan, or the OECD companies are providing. And that would, at dollars at then, in 2045, would equate to about 1.5 trillion US dollars, which could be probably at that time about 6 or 7% of India's GDP. So, how? That is the big question. I have been to a lot of conferences. I've been to probably every university worth its name around the world. You can probably, pick up, you can find like 5,000 different kinds of sensors being manufactured. We're talking of sensors here. But how many of those really will see the light of the day, or I will come to some of the conditions required. So how? I think we have to start by using innovative business models, products, and state-of-the-art manufacturing technologies to mass produce very affordable products. I'll come to an example later. So this is an example of what we are working towards. This is actually work in progress. Our company, are developing easy to use, rapid, non-invasive screening techniques for the top 4 killer diseases, as was mandated to us by the government. The end goal, which is our internal goal, is to provide that to 1 billion adult Indians, maybe once a year, at about $13 per person. That's about $1,000 per person, and they will all be using advanced sensors manufactured with the cutting edge technology. So this is not going to be something, okay, okay, we don't have much budget, so let's go and provide a cheap product. This is what manufacturing is about. So, second key to focus is have a credible plan to achieve that vision. We all can come up with nice policy papers, we make census, we make our presentations, do our collaborations, and then it ends there. So, sensors, at least again, sensors, this is the way what we do, how we proceed, is to, first of all, should have a significant social impact. Now, I break it down into 2 areas, and not just for sensors. This is for a lot of other projects, for a lot of other companies I work with. One is the intangible impact, which is like personal safety, health, and comfort. Like, a man or a person would do anything for their family, their kids, personal comfort, and sometimes just a matter of feeling superior, that, oh, I have a better looking car than the neighbor next door. These are intangible impacts. Then there should be a tangible impact, which is more in industry, that there should be higher productivity, better efficiency of resource utilization, better public management, so. And then the next should be, the product should be safe, reliable, accessible, basically meaning accessible, low cost, and invisible. What I mean by invisible is that, you have to make so that you don't realize they're there. And by default means you have to make them very small. And you have to make them, almost like, you don't, it's very much like, what Professor Bhaskar mentioned about the artificial skin. Let's say you got burned and, you wanted to apply that artificial skin there. You should know it's there. It should not be like one of those prosthetics, like you have a big claw hanging out and every day you look at it and say, oh my goodness, what happened to my hand? So this is what, these are the conditions by how you start thinking, okay, what we need to manufacture, what technologies we need to deploy. And then the sensors themselves need to be designed. We call it like design for manufacturing. From day one, when we have our design review processes, we ask a lot of tough questions. Who's going to manufacture it? How are we going to manufacture it? Is it going to be a process where the material itself are very cheap, but the process control is so expensive that you might not be able to achieve it, or probably spend 5 years just stabilizing the process? So they should be designed to be mass produced very economically. And again, that's development of the right business models, because why I say a business model, because sometimes you might have to tweak the business model to use a not so optimal product, but that might result in something very optimal. And there's a lot of debate going on in India right now on what kind of lithium batteries we should use. And first of all, we were just saying, okay, just use what the rest of the world is using. And now the debate is shifting more into, okay, what is best for the Indian conditions and all. And now people are really starting to make sense. Then design manufacturing process with state-of-the-art technologies. I will show you with numbers how that works out. No jugaad, please. High technology is the one that really creates value and is commercially sustainable. You need to create high cost performance product, not cheap products. So it does involve initial investment, but this is your insurance against obsolescence and staying competitive. And you have to develop robust and redundant supply chains with easily available materials. So really got to ask yourself the question when you're designing, when you're doing R&D, okay, where am I going to get that material? Or who's going to manufacture it? That needs to be done. And then there should be a continuous liberal investment in material and process improvement and development, because that is the one that ensures commercial success and and prevents obsolescence. So then the next thing is focus. Now we will, even in this Congress, I'm sure there will be at least, if not hundreds, at least dozens of different sensors. And you might have like 7 or 8 different types of sensors just measuring temperature, feel the thing. But at some point, we need to make a choice and say, this is what we are going to do. And this is what we are going to put our resources into. So let me then jump now. What I mean by focusing to the Murata success story. It is by objectively considered to be one of the most successful technology companies in the world. In its existence for more than 75 years, it only went into red a couple of times, for 1 quarter during Lehman shock and once for, I think, the year in oil shock in the 70s. Murata's core competencies, I think you can get this also from their website, is power to read the future, give shape to needs, and power to deliver value. These are just like, slogans and nothing really great. But look at this fact now. Excuse me. The annual production of just capacitors in Murata is more than 1 trillion. I think it's something easier for English to understand crore. So Murata ships more than 400 crore components every day. These are capacitor components. Each of them, every one of them is tested. And how? Why are we there? And there's only one thing. The only underlying technology which is the core competence of Murata built over the last 75 years has been in electroceramics. It started off with ferroelectric, then went to piezoelectric. It's a similar thing. They're all like titanates, and slowly. And that is what they have been focusing on. And that has made them the giants of the world. It's the same thing like with the Samsung work on the DRAMs or something. You have to focus, and then you got to start working on the technologies. So this is the level of the volumes, and this is the level of commitment I'm talking of. Now, look, Murata's core competency is actually pretty limited. In sense, materials. Yeah, it's a broad field, but they have basically focused on electro ceramics. Yet they have a lot of expertise in organics and other kind of materials, but those are all like auxiliary materials. Then the next thing is sheet casting. Their top of the line capacitors, I've been there with them for 30 years. I've been on the ground. They cast sheets, ceramic sheets of 0.6 microns. That is 600 nanometers of sheets, and then they print it with electrodes, nickel electrodes of 0.2 or 0.3 microns, stack all of them, about 1,000 layers, in about a total size of 1 millimeter, and then sinter it. So their technologies are material, sheet casting, and sintering. Now, if you didn't have these technologies, or if you didn't develop these technologies, whatever you do in the lab might make a nice paper, or probably use in some applications, but you can never take it to commercial success. And then processing and finishing, well, that's okay. And inspection and packaging, as you can see from the photograph here, every component that leaves the factory is tested for all its properties. So this is the core competence built over 70 or 80 years, which has made them where they are today. A conviction that we will focus on electroceramics. They never veered away. They never went into electrolytics. They never went into a thing, and that's where they are today. And most of the other component, the module technology came, the core-fired technology came from Sintering. All their new products are basically offshoots of the core technologies that were developed, whether it's a SAW filter and all that. Yeah, the principles might be different, but the manufacturing technologies are pretty much the same. Then, this is, I mean, if you look at the core competency of Murata, let's have a look at their revenues. Since 2005 to 2020, what I need you to look at is this red line, which is the ratio of the new products in terms of sales to the net sales of the year. It is constantly around above 30%. So 30% of the products that are sold every year, and this is a $16 billion company, are new products. And how do they achieve it? The R&D budget, at least for as far as I remember, has always stayed between 6 and 7%, to the tune now that in 2020, they spent $1 billion on R&D. They spent about more than $2 billion on equipment, on capital equipment, and still end up making $3.5 billion of net profit. This is the scale. Of course, we can't reach the scale right away, but this comes from only 2 or 3 things I mentioned before. First of all, you got to focus on what you're good. You got to build a core competency, and then you got to invest in high technology. Then make products. Now you were looking at, we talked of 1 trillion capacitors. Now, if you look at the capacitor process, you will think, my goodness, how do they do all this? And the average selling price of a Murata capacitor is about 35 paisa. That is Indian money. 0.35 rupees, 35 paisa is the cost. Some of them can be as low as 7 paisa, and some of them are higher, but that is the average cost. That is the volumes. That is when, I call capacitors, you can just sprinkle them and people won't even notice. They're so invisible and so cheap, but all the more very important. So this is the level of commitment that is required to become number one. So I think coming towards the, okay, what is the proposed road ahead for India? How to do it? I think quite a few, or maybe all of you, have heard of these institutions. I hope so. Well, I have had the, the fortune of being, have visited all of them and have good relations, at least till a few years ago. I now lost contact with some of them. So this A-Star, ITRI, IMEC, LETI, VTT, and AIST, also called Sansuken. These are specialized institutions just for the very purpose. And these are almost like they're supported partially by the countries, by the governments, but their only mission is to develop state-of-the-art processing technologies. So if tomorrow, Professor Bhaskaran wanted to go and, get her artificial skin manufactured, she would probably put it better. She goes to VTT Finland or some of those places. ITRI, Taiwan, its biggest claim to success is Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. TSMC is the graduate of ITRI. It was incubated there. And LETI CETEC, ST Micro. IMEC, every country in the world sends its best engineers there because the state-of-the-art manufacturing technologies for semiconductors, 7 nanometers, everything is being done there. And AIST is the same thing in Japan, Sansuken. So this is a common theme here. None of them works on fundamental R&D. They try to make products which can be mass-produced in for a very low cost and using very high tech. So if we have to focus on manufacturing, what do we need to do? I think we need to choose 1 or 2 areas where we want to develop core competencies. regardless of the resources available, even if you had a lot of money, I think it is always better to start with something, focus on a couple of things. You say, okay, we are going to focus on electrochemical sensors, or we're going to focus on carbon-based sensors or MEMS technology. You got to pick a couple and then focus there. I think it's always better, and that is most of the successful companies start with going into a niche market. So be a world-leading specialty store rather than being a low-quality general store. And then create a multidisciplinary, dedicated institution in India for developing commercially viable state-of-the-art manufacturing technologies, very much like the institutions I have shown you in the previous slide. I have forgotten the count. I once sat down and looking at the number of research labs under each ministry in India. I mean, it is a very significant number. But, I mean, some bit of a movement like IIT Kanpur has now a Flexi Center, and, some of the IITs are developing. But I really don't see, there is one NFTDC, which comes close to this, really a government-sponsored huge where you can get the best brains and you start developing manufacturing technologies. We need that. I mean, that is probably the conclusion of my talk today. And then you transfer the expertise to industries and imbue a culture of proactive R&D investment to maintain global competitiveness. And I think everything needs to have a goal. And the goal for our government or that institution, like all the ones before, should be that they should be creating at least one world-leading company in a specific field every 10 to 15 years. So if even every decade or every 15 years, they spawn an industry which becomes, even in their niche areas, #1 in the world, then I think we would have done a great job. So that's all, my short presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Karun Malhotra, for the comprehensive talk. Now the forum is open for questions.
Dr. Malhotra, thank you so much. It was wonderful. I think you really laid a very clear-cut roadmap for us. Thank you so much for the valuable guidance. Just one quick question. I was so surprised to see that your casting technology has come down to somewhere around 0.6 micron. Is it that slot die method?
No, it's in sort of a slot die method, yeah. Hello.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, I will. Since you asked me that question, I had a slide in the appendix. I'll show you that. That is my assessment of what is the relative, because when I was in the US, I mean, Pennsylvania State University, they were doing research on dielectric, and they came and they wanted me to get involved in a new project where they wanted to develop some thin films. And they said, okay, let's start developing 5 micron thins. And I was saying, okay, my goodness, we were already going to commercialize 1 micron. So this is this is from my experience. You have pure science, applied science, and engineering, technology, manufacturing technologies. I think that each of the institutions should play in their core competencies. So if, I've been to MIT, Stanford. If an MIT or Stanford professor comes and says, I have this nice material, you can take it to mass manufacturing, I just walk out of there. I mean, it is not that easy, to have do a research project and then you take it to manufacturing. So the point what I want to show you here, Dr. Raghu, is that many times the industry or the people in the academia, they don't really know the extent of the advances that are happening, especially large companies. And if my company is spending $1 billion, that is probably more than the entire R&D budget of India, or what the Indian government gives. So So you have to understand. So that's where I said, I mean, leaders, yeah, research engineering, but then pure science, TRL 1 to TRL 3, the large companies should not even go there. They just waste money. That money should be given to the industries. Applied science engineering, and the one I'm talking of is the technology development institutes, maybe linked leader to -3 to +3. But as you see, as you go towards the right, I mean, you have to really work with the leaders. Yeah.
And we are very fortunate that Murata has, taken our technology, and you are able to see that you will be able to take it up to the masses. We are very fortunate, sir. Thank you so much for being with us.
Now, thank you very much. I think I just want to just make a small comment there. We have taken your technology, we'll take it to the masses, but it might be a little different form, although it will be your technology. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Dr. Karun Malhotra, this is Kumar from CMET.
Yes.
Actually, you have shown in one slide the large numbers of capacitors being rolled out from the Murata facility per day.
Yes.
So, so let us say that could we have a look at that slide? Yeah. So
yes,
when you have when the current capability of Murata stands at this huge number, is it possible for you to look back and say at what capacity the technology was, if it is taken from outside, was absorbed, and how much time it has taken for you to achieve this capacity? And the amount of in-house effort that has gone into reaching this stupendous level.
That's a very great question. There are two aspects to it. It is like the first one, as you said, is the commitment, because Murata, took a call that they were going to focus on ceramics. They took that call in the 60s because they knew that future, the way the industry, the semiconductor, all going to develop, digital is going to come on. There will be no room. I mean, the tantalum, the electrolytics will slowly go away. Now, then they had to make a choice on the technology. Because they were, capacitors, when they were very big, they were using few layers, they were palladium electrodes. Then, the industry started going to high silver and all that. But Murata said, no, we see the future. We have to go with nickel electrodes, the base metals, because otherwise, Murata at that point already saw 400, 500, 600 layer capacitors. People didn't believe them. And then they started developing technology. People had given up. That initial technology was developed in the US. It was given up. Murata kept working on it for 15 years, came up with the product. And after that, they just focused on, and when the ceramics, so it became self-sustaining. People liked ceramics capacitor. They started moving to ceramic capacitors. So we drove the market, and we made it so in volume, so cheap and all, that, an engineer just, I just want to reduce my EMI noise. He'll just put 2 more capacitors and it will add a 1 cent to his board. So it was something that we committed on technology. We believed in it. We had our roadmaps, and then the market picked up, and then we just keep on adding capacity. Just yesterday, we made an announcement that we're adding 1 more plant. And most of the Murata's plants, 75% of their manufacturing is still done in Japan. More than 90% of the sales are overseas, and still we are probably one of the most competitive companies in the world. So this is a progressive thing, but to take a product from, let's say, R&D to real mass production it takes about 15 years. That's the answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Karun Malhotra, for the mind-blowing lecture and for emphasizing the industrial point of view for semiconductor research. And thanks for being associated with CMET for long. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
And we are moving to our next session, and I hope the speaker is joined. Our next speaker is Professor Sakshi Danikar. She's assistant professor at the Department of Electrical Engineering, IIT Jodhpur. And prior to this, she was working as a research scientist and INSPIRE faculty at the Center for Biomedical Engineering and Center for Applied Research in Electronics, IIT Delhi. And her current research interest includes the fabrication of prototype sensors for societal applications, more particularly on microfabrication, MEMS, and semiconductor device design and development. And she is an editorial board member of IEEE Sensor Letters, a renowned journal for sensor research, and also she is an ambassador and Women in Sensor chair of the IEEE Sensor Council. She has more than 40 research papers in her accolades and several patents, which includes 2 US patents in her credit. And she's a recipient of several national and international awards, notably IEEE Young Professional Hall of Fame Award in 2019. And her team is also awarded first position in Tata Hackathon in the year 2017. With this short note, I welcome Professor Sakshi to deliver the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Arul, and thank you, Dr. Seema and organizers for inviting me for this wonderful the conference. So I heard a little bit of the previous lecture, and I found that I missed a lot of it. Okay, so I'll be talking about development of sensors for societal applications. I'll quickly share my slides. Just give me 1 second. So would there be any questions? It can be put in the chat box, or we can always discuss it towards the end. Okay, I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. So as already introduced, I am working in electrical engineering at IIT Jodhpur. You can see some bit of it in my background also. Since during the COVID time, we are not able to meet, so I just thought that I'll put a short glimpse of how the institute looks like. So one good thing that I realized after coming from Delhi here in Jodhpur is that the sky is blue, as we have always been taught since childhood. That's one good thing about Jodhpur. And then the architecture that you see is very unique. This is made with thick sandstone rocks. So once we are inside, it's totally, the buildings are thermally insulated. So we really don't feel the heat from outside, and we also don't feel the cold from outside. So during summers, it's a blessing. So that way it has a unique architecture. And then this is our clock tower. On the right-hand side that you see, this is our Department of Electrical Engineering building. So most of the buildings that you see are quite identical in terms of the department. And this is the famous admin block. So maybe sometime later, once the situation improves, please visit us, see how the campus is. It's beautiful. Okay. So coming on to the outline of the presentation. So I'll be talking about, I'll give a very brief introduction of nanomaterials because I use these in sensing applications. And then we'll talk about the processes that we use for making these sensors, which are useful for the society. And then I'll pick up some of the case studies that we have been working on, what we are currently working on, and then my team. So coming on to nanomaterials, I'm sure many of you or almost all of you know about it, the certain advantages that nanomaterials provide. One, for sensing application that we use is that it's a high surface area. So we are able to get a lot of connecting points, say from the sensor to our analyte, right? The specific sites, the binding sites in case of nanomaterials increases. So we mainly work in the 2D domain and the 1D domain, where we are saying that from 3D, we have restricted one axis movement, right? So now the movement of electrons is only in 2 dimensions. And if I further reduce one more dimension, then we have electrons moving only in one direction. So we mainly work in the 2D or 1D domain, and we use these structures as our base for sensing applications. Now, coming on to how we use these nanomaterials. So this is very much known. You pick up any of the sensors, right? And these sensors are like everywhere, starting from our phone, right, which is a touch screen, and your air quality monitoring that happens. Like we know that Delhi is one of the most polluted cities now. So air quality monitoring, those are sensors that we use, right? In our cars, there are shock absorbers. So we use them almost on a daily basis. For health, so starting from a COVID detection kit to a thermometer to a pulse oximeter, right? All these are sensors which are around us. And many of them use nanomaterials, right? Like very commonly, air quality monitoring sensors use nanomaterials. Even in terms of health, there are a lot of such examples now available where nano has creeped in. And at one time when this nanomaterial had started, there was a lot of buzz about it, right? But still we have a long way to go because there are some challenges with nanomaterials, say their stability, their aging, which causes an issue sometimes when we are using them as sensors. So apart from the challenges that even the researchers are trying to now solve, there are immense applications. So these are just a few to name, and then there are really many more. So how do we use these sensors, right? How do we make these sensors? So any electronic device, or I say any sensor, right? Where you need certain repeatability, right? You need certain accuracy. Nothing should be such that I bring it home, say it's a point of care device, I bring it here and then it works one time and then it doesn't work, right? So we also want that many of such sensors which are identical are produced at one time, right? And then they are tested. And once they are tested, we are able to say, create some data sheets and say, this is what we found, that so many numbers of sensors we were able to develop at one point of time. And this is the kind of reproducibility that we have from them. So for that, what we need is a standard process, right? So if I take a simple example that we are, say, making sensors, one say at 80-degree temperature and few at 200 and few at 600. What we will find in the end is a lot of random results coming from sensors because they have been prepared at different temperatures. And so for the development of these sensors, what you need is standard processes. And we are lucky that we have material like silicon, which is very much known for semiconductor devices, right? All our processors, ICs, right, that we see behind our CPU are all made on this chip silicon because of its fantastic properties that it provides. So we also take the same advantage of this material silicon, and we use scalable processes to develop these sensors. So this flower diagram that you see, these mention some of the processes that we generally use, right? And then apart from this also, there are many other processes that can be used for developing whatever kind of application you're working on, right? So on the right-hand side that you see, this is a chip which consists of different diodes, bipolar transistors, and test structures. So what we did was that we wanted to know that when we are, say, performing a diffusion of N-type in P silicon or P-type in N silicon, we wanted to characterize the chip at the same time while it is made, and not wanted to do it on another chip. So that's how we included test structures on the same wafer so that we are able to see the exact, say, diffusion depth that has happened on the wafer while the transistor was being fabricated. So the one on the sides that you see are much bigger pads. These are the contact pads made in aluminum. And the ones that are inside are smaller. But these are not still nanostructure. This is still the microfabrication that was done. Later on, we can use these sensors, these transistors as sensors. right? So performing, say, different processes on a chip involves the standard microfabrication processes, right? So I will briefly go through all of them as to what stage we use, and then I'll show you what exactly we did when we made our gas sensors or biosensors. So one thing that is very much needed in any kind of fabrication process is cleanliness. Right, it's the same with silicon. If you're using silicon wafer, you have to be very, very careful about what kind of room you're working in. A small dust particle can create a havoc in the experiment. So we would do cleaning if needed, polishing if needed, and definitely clean all the wafers before use. And then comes thermal oxidation, which is growing silicon dioxide on silicon wafer, right? So conventionally, silicon dioxide is known to be a material which provides a very good insulation, right? Today, in terms of MOSFET, if I talk about this metal oxide, right? This oxide has now been replaced by high K dielectric materials, which are better performing than oxide, right? So that those have been replaced. But if I talk about not transistor, right? I talk about, say, 100, 200 devices being made on 2-inch silicon wafer, I would still require some kind of insulation between the devices, and then I need not need a high K dielectric because I'm still not then making a transistor. So thermal oxidation is one of the very basic steps we perform even when we are making MEMS-based structures. Then comes diffusion that is required when we are again performing P-type diffusion or N-type diffusion, right? In the beginning, we just see a small depth of the dopant layer, right? And when we remove that source and further keep it at high temperature, we see that this layer starts to seep in. And this is what really gives us the junction depth, right? Then comes our lithography, where we create structures, we create patterns on silicon wafer, right? So how many we want, what kind of contact pad we want, right? And while we are, say, designing our contact pads, is something that is done by the deposition, right? So if we want aluminum or we want gold, we need 2 contact pads, we need 4, right? Or we need many more on the surface. Where this interconnect will go to which side is something that is controlled by what layer is being deposited, right? And which technique you're using, right? So there can be a physical vapor deposition technique, there can be a chemical vapor deposition technique, and then they also have those subclasses, right? So these processes are used day in and out to fabricate scalable sensors, which is the key point, right? So if, like, we have also worked on sol gel processes. So the challenge we faced was that once you make the solution and you change it into a gel, right? And then you coat it on the wafer. One thing that is extremely difficult to obtain is a uniformity of thickness of that film on the entire just 2-inch silicon wafer, right? 2-inch is very small. Even the industry doesn't use 2-inch today. But for R&D, 2-inch is the best. So the idea is that if we are able to optimize something very well with good repeatability, say on a 2-inch or maximum 4-inch, right? Then it can be used, it can be taken up by the industry, and then they can use it for even bigger wafers, right? Okay, so coming on to what we do in terms of nano sensors. So one, I have discussed that we work on wafer scalable processes, right? And then one key thing that we do is we develop room temperature operable sensors. So the materials that we use for using these, for making these sensors is something like metal oxides, right? And it's very well known metal oxides perform very well at high temperatures. That's how they are, right? They have a high band gap, right? They get activated only when they are excited at high temperatures. So how we do it is what I'll come to in the coming slides. Then is I'll show you some of the slides which is related to detection of acetone in human breath, where we have tried detecting diabetic ketoacidosis, right? So when I'll come to that slide, I'll talk about it. And then I will also show you some slides related to bacteria and water. I hope we have that much time, so I'll go quickly to the next one. Okay, so we have talked about silicon, right? I have already informed that we work on silicon because of its versatile properties. One other thing that we do with silicon is we work on the nanostructured part of silicon, right? So porous silicon is kind of bread and butter of our lab, of all our students. So what we have observed that if I club this metal oxide with a nanostructured silicon,
the respective person can answer. So all others can ask questions in the chat box with poster number.
Karthik, can you mute? Karthik, can you mute? Dr. Karthik, can you mute, please?
Okay, thank you. So if we club this metal oxide with porous silicon, what we observed that the operating temperature of this sensor went drastically down to room temperature, mainly because of these two junctions, right? One coming from porous silicon and the other coming from metal oxide, right? Both being semiconductors. So once they form this NP-PN or PP plus junction, right? The depletion layer that is being formed in between these two junctions help us to get sensing results at room temperature, right? So nanostructured silicon, we also call it porous silicon. It's a silicon material with nanostructured pores. So we are left with nanocrystallites between the pores. These show quantum confinement effects. And so we are able to use this even standalone as a sensor. And if you club it with titanium dioxide or molybdenum trioxide or even molybdenum disulfide, which is a 2D material, we are able to see great results. So coming on to very basic of what exactly electrical gas sensor is. So sensor which is responding, say, to a gas. So it is showing a change in its electrical properties when it is exposed to a gas is typically what we call it as electrical gas sensor. There are various methods to test a gas sensor, right? We can have electrical methods, we can have optical, we can have electrochemical, and many more mechanical methods, right? We primarily focus on electrical ones, and in terms of materials, we focus on metal oxides with nanostructured silicon. So I'll also show you the setup. It will come a little later, I think, yeah. So coming on to sensor characteristics, so how we read them, right? So what we do, we have our sensor material, right, with electrodes, and we then expose it to a reducing gas. Now, one is the first impression of the sensing curve can tell us what is exactly happening in the material. So what I do that we keep this reducing gas as fixed, right? And as we expose it to as we expose our sensor to the gas, we see a, say, change in resistance, which is like increasing resistance. So this, at that moment, gives an idea that the material that we have made is P-type. And if we see a decrease in resistance with the same gas being exposed, we understand that the material is N-type. So this is like one short way to know whether it is a P-type or N-type material. And of course, the other way is that we do Hall effect measurements and we understand the dopant and the dopant concentration from that experiment. Okay, so coming on to alcohol sensor. So what we did, we tried two approaches. So why I'm discussing alcohol sensor, say detection of this in human breath. So one is that I have a project that I'm working on, wherein we are trying to detect alcohol in human breath, right? So this was mainly started for to be used for either personal care or to be used by traffic police, right? It's very commonly known that traffic police is generally using these alcohol breath analyzers, especially around the New Year time, right? But I don't know how many of us really know that these all are imported and one piece of it is quite expensive. So with a team of some enthusiastic students, when I was in IIT Delhi, they were working with me and we had some discussions with the traffic police, Delhi police, and we tried understanding that what exactly they want to see in terms of alcohol breath analyzer, right? And why is it that such an expensive thing is being imported without this being made somewhere in India? So that's how the whole thing started. And we could get good results in the sense that we could reach to a benchmark so that we are able to say that how it is now competitive with the commercial sensors. What are the challenges that the commercial ones have, right? And how we are addressing to those challenges. So we tried different approaches to build such a sensor. One was we used porous silicon, and then we had a very thin layer of TiO2 at the top, right? TiO2 is known to be a hydrophobic material. So in terms of, say, the moisture coming from breath can still be kind of filtered, right? When it is, when alcohol is interacting with the sensor. So we tried different versions with metal oxide, without metal oxide, where humidity is showing more effect, where it is showing less effect, right? And then the thickness of TiO2, right? At what point we are getting room temperature operable sensors. So that's what we concluded, that if we use porous silicon with, say, a very thin layer of metal oxide, right? In this case, TiO2, we are able to get a good sensitivity to ethanol, right? So, but at the same time, if I would expose it to other VOCs, right, which may also be present in the breath, because breath is not something that is static, right? We have a lot of variables in breath. So then also we could see the change in response, change in the resistance. However, that was lesser. So that became another task now, that how can we make it selective? It's really difficult to achieve selectivity with something like metal oxides, right? So then we tried another approach. What we did here, we grew titanium dioxide nanotubes, which was a little thicker than the previous version. And here we did a lot of optimization in terms of contact pad size, in terms of, again, it's nanotubes. If they are, uniformly spread over the surface, and all that characterization was done to understand what we are achieving. And what we realized here was that we could see change in response, but at higher temperature. So the sensitivity improved drastically. What we lost really was the operating temperature, which we wanted to be room temperature, so that we don't have to kind of integrate a heater now and then, have a bigger battery to run the system. So that's how we started to work on something called as electronic nose, right? So I'll come to that slide. I would like to show the sensing setup that we used. So to make sure that we are kind of simulating the human breath, we used compressed air, which could give us almost like 95 to 98% humidity inside the chamber. And the nitrogen gas was used as the carrier gas, which would bring in the vapors inside, right? And by controlling this compressed air flow rates and the temperature of the analyte, so that we could control the, say, the vapor pressure, which in turn helped us control the concentration, we could see that we are able to achieve almost ppm to sub ppm level. Now, if I talk about alcohol sensing in breath, this is something that we need around 300 ppm, right? So there is really no requirement to go to something like PPT or really low level of PPB, right? So what we could do that by controlling these three conditions, we could get sub ppm to even higher levels, say 700 ppm of the concentration of alcohol and other VOCs. Then, so coming on to electronic nose, what exactly we did in this. So electronic nose is like an artificial nose, right? Where you can, so as we grow, right, we understand different smells, different aromas coming from different things, right? So we know that this is a perfume, and this is, say, agarbatti, this is sandal, this is something else, this is a rose flower, or this is some other flower, right? So that's how we learn, right? And our brain receives these signals and it interprets, right? And it then helps us memorize. So next time when we are exposed to the same smell, we know this is what it is, right? What human being is not able to do, how much, right? We don't quantify. We don't quantify that, okay, this much is the smell of the perfume. We can always say it relatively, right? So I can smell, say, more of Ruh Afza and less of orange, but how much is something that human brain doesn't do. So what electronic nose or this artificial nose does is, this comprises of a sensor array where you have like 6, you have 10, you have 20, right? Maximum I have seen 20 in one of the commercial electronic nose. So there you have array of sensors, and they are exposed to all these different smells, exactly like a human noses, right? And there we see that you can, using the data that you receive from this array, this is like, so if there are 6 sensors, you have like 6 types of data, right? And then you record it every hour, every day, every week, right? When you put it together, you can see a kind of pattern being generated. This pattern then goes through something like a pattern recognition technique, right? Where you have these machine learning algorithms. So it's almost like adding AI, artificial intelligence, to your system, right? And making it learn. So once you have exposed it, just like a human being is exposed to different smell, and the brain learns, the machine learns. And more the exposure, better is the learning. This is how it is very much similar to a human olfactory system, right? And that's what we say, that electronic nose is nothing but how the brain is processing the signal and trying to remember as to what smell it was exposed to. So here also we do something similar, and we took like 3 different samples, right? And then we collated the data. And when it was run through this principal component analysis, we could see that we were able to identify alcohol of the total lot, right? So that was the target, that we wanted to segregate alcohol from the bunch of VOCs, right? And then this is like the first version. I'll show you some more packaging that we did for different sensors. So this was one of the way how we put it on the TO header, and then we wire bonded it, and we could use it in our prototypes that we had built upon. Okay, so coming on to diabetic ketoacidosis. So what we wanted to do was, we wanted to see if acetone can be specifically be detected in human breath, right? So acetone, why would it come in the human breath, first of all, right? Alcohol, we all know. So if a person exercises a lot, right? So a lot of, say, fat burning is happening in the body. There is one reason that the acetone can enter into the breath. The other is that the person has high sugar levels, really high sugar levels, right? Where this sugar is now not getting absorbed in the body, rather the fats are being burned to get energy, right? So again, acetone is like a byproduct that enters into the breath stream. So conventionally, when people would go to the doctor, right, the doctor would just check the smell and say it's a fruity smell, so you are diabetic, right? They may not be able to again tell the levels, but these are indications. So this is something that we wanted to do, that if there is something like a breath-based device, right, that one can have at home, and especially for people, younger kids, right, who cannot express the symptoms, right? Grown-ups can express what is happening to them, but kids really cannot. So we tried developing some sensors with molybdenum trioxide, being the metal oxide, on nanostructured silicon, and we tried exposing it to different VOCs, right? So what we could see, that after the process we followed to fabricate this molybdenum trioxide on the whole wafer, we could see nanoribbon kind of structure. And then we also played around with the thickness of molybdenum trioxide, at what point it shows P-type, at what point it shows N-type behavior, right? All of that was done. And then again, with the help of these test structures, we could do Hall effect measurements and see what is the type of material that is being formed. So what was observed was that if I see molybdenum trioxide on porous silicon would give extremely high response to acetone. But again, if I say about others, Then alcohol is generally always competing with acetone. Alcohol, methanol, acetone, they're always competing. So it's really hard to again have acetone, kind of specifically being detected if ethanol is present, unless its sensitivity is extremely high, which we could observe here. It went on really high, say around 18% sensitivity was achieved in comparison to alcohol being something like 3%. So it is also, if you go through some medical literature, it was seen that if there's a healthy person, right, and a diabetic person, so the line is very thin, right? A healthy person has like 0.9 ppm of acetone, less than or equal to, and diabetic would have something like 1.8. And if I say diabetic ketoacidosis would touch something around 100 ppm. So then that line and a healthy line is okay, they are quite far, right? But then it's still very hard to have a device which would just say a person is healthy or diabetic, right? So as of now also, we are trying to work on the diabetic ketoacidosis part, because that's really a major challenge than this. And we are trying to see if we can get something like a non-invasive method of detecting acetone in breath, which can be related to, say, sugar in blood. And whenever we perform our different sensing tests, what we do is process scalability and stability tests. This we do for all the sensors. So we pick up sensors from different parts of the wafer. We pick up sensors from different batches of wafer, right? And then we expose them to the same conditions and see if they are repeatable or not, right? So this way we get some assurance that the process that we are following for building these sensors is correct. So this is one prototype that was made for detection of diabetic ketoacidosis in breath, right? How much time do I have?
Another 10 minutes you have.
10 minutes, okay, thanks. So I would also like to discuss some part of this MEMS-based gas sensor, which we found it to be very interesting, mainly because this is something that we found that no one has done before. So as we know that nanostructured silicon, right, when it is formed, when you're making a pore in a material, right, you're actually kind of etching and then you're making that groove, right, V or U shape of a groove. Now, if I want to integrate a heater with it, right, it's extremely challenging because you have to do lithography, you have to do backside etching, something like this that you see here, right? And then various steps I have to perform to have contact pads also. So what we did, we could, with a lot of discussion and iteration and even failures, we could get chips where we had, say, this pit that you see, right? So this was a cavity. So this was a cavity, right? And at the top, we could get our heater, right? And then we could have our IDEs, which we can use for our sensing applications, right? And just with that heater, we had our sensing films, right? So everything was in one plane, and that's how it's called planar MEMS. So MEMS is micro electromechanical systems, right? It's a totally different world of sensors. And we know that these MEMS structures are extremely tedious to make, right? The kind of steps that are required, the kind of processes that are required, sometimes they're harsh chemicals which would actually spoil your entire film. So this was one of the very good results that we could get. So this, we related it to our other TiO2 work where we needed sensing to be done at an optimized temperature. So we could integrate a heater with the sensing film, and we also had porous silicon included here. So what was observed that in absence of that nanostructured silicon film, the temperature, operating temperature was pretty high. So we could bring it down with the help of our nanostructured silicon. So this was something that was observed here, that without nanostructured silicon, when we did, so this is simulation done in COMSOL, so without any nanosilicon, it was very hard to achieve something like even 110 with a lesser voltage, right? So we had to apply a lot of voltage to reach a higher level temperature, which required which meant more power consumption. That is something that we wanted to cut down. We wanted to make a device which could work with, say, handheld battery, right? So this is something, in case you want more details, you can always go through the research paper. It was published. And we also did some thermal measurements using the IR camera. So one, we did the simulation, and then to validate that, we could see the difference in between the chips, which was with nanostructured silicon and without nanostructured silicon. So this was one of the kind of, I should say, mini achievements that we could get. So coming on to some of the biosensor testing that we did. So this was done, some part of it was done in Toyo University through a collaboration. This IIT Delhi and Toyo University had a combined project. So there, I had gone there for a few months, and then we could do some of the testing of our chips with bacteria being in water. So what we did here was that we used, again, our nanostructured silicon with 10 nanometer thickness of TiO2. But instead of doing these electrical measurements, we were more interested in the photoluminescence studies. This titanium dioxide has a very good PL response, and same as nanostructured silicon. So we wanted to see that if this photoluminescence can get affected in presence of bacteria, right? So what we could, so what we did, something that is very important in case of a biosensor application, is surface functionalization, right? So here in bio, it's easy to have a specificity, right? In gas, it's difficult to have specificity. So what we did here, we functionalized the surface with APTS, and after that, these were exposed to antibodies straight away. In other case, we used glutaraldehyde, right? So it was, we wanted to check glutaraldehyde was also expected to give good results. However, only in case of direct APTS being exposed to antibodies, right? We could see that the PL signal gave a better response, primarily because of these, the binding between this APTS, right? This amine with carboxyl group of this antibody was found to be better. So this is one thing that we saw, that as the concentration was increased, we could see enhancement in PL, which is in a way better in comparison to where the photoluminescence gets quenched, right? Because there is a limit here. There was really no limit. We could go to higher concentrations to lower concentrations. So this is also published in case anybody wants to read it in more detail. I would give just few glimpses of few other devices that we have made in the past. So one was a micro mixer device. So this was one of the projects with BRC. And here we etched channels, micro channels in silicon, right, of different depths and different widths, right, depending on the design. So we had two inputs and then one output. And this was mainly a mixer. So one solution would enter from port 1, the other would enter from port 2, and then flow around, and then we could see after receiving the output. So this was done through, the channels were sealed using anodic bonding, where we had this glass wafer at high temperature and high voltage would bond hermetically with the silicon wafer. So this gave us great results, and we could kind of try out with our silicon wafer. We could do a lot of things, because when the facilities are available, you can do multiple things at the same time. The other thing that we had worked on is DC MEMS switch. So MEMS, again, like I said, is micro electromechanical system. So just to give a brief idea as to what we did, was that this was our silicon wafer, which really had the switch here. And this was, again, a glass wafer, right? And then we had aluminum patterned at the bottom side, right? And as we would apply, say, an actuation voltage here, if I see in this schematic, whatever signal was applied at this terminal, upon application of this actuation voltage, this beam would touch the this beam would have a bolt contact, which would get in touch with the aluminum on this glass slide, right? Once they are in contact, the signal then flows through from one port to the other. And that's how it's like a switch, right? When the voltage is applied, it allows the signal. When the voltage is removed, it does not allow, right? So we could see a moving structure of silicon in the silicon wafer. And this was like the really toughest part. Making sensors is much more easier. MEM switch takes a lot of effort and lot of iterations, lot of hit and trials, and lot of consumables, right? Lot of time. But then once you get it, we could see the microscope images, and we could test the devices, and then we could dice them, package them. That gives a different feel altogether. Okay, so coming on to the different package devices. So we do some packaging just on our this 40-pin header. This you would know, this simple ceramic header. The other kind of packaging we do is some that we make in our workshop itself. So like this is a pressure sensor, and this is a brass holding, right, that was made in the workshop. And then we would apply pressure from the back, and then we could see the change in voltage. Some of the other packagings include the TO packaging that I have already shown. And then these are the different versions of gas sensors. So like the first one is always shabby, and so was ours. And slowly it got improved. Now we are working on a little miniaturized version. And what we are trying to do is we are trying to remove this display now from our PCB. So what we are trying to do is something that we are working on IoT, right? So if we are trying to transfer data through the cloud, we are trying to make devices communicate. So there's one of my students who work in IoT, and we are trying to use these sensors, some actuators, put together in a network so that we are able to make the signals flow and make the control happen with the help of IoT, right? And AI is something that I've already explained how we are using this AI aspect in our electronic nose system. So this is bringing us to an end. This is my team. So I have dedicated students at IIT Jodhpur. Vandana is working in gas sensors. Nikhil is working in diagnostics. Manpreet is working in IoT. So what we have at IIT Jodhpur is interdisciplinary research programs, under which we can have one student who is chaired by faculty members from different departments. So partly I contribute and partly my colleague will contribute, and that's how we are able to do some transdisciplinary work. And Ananya is a new student. She would be working more or less on biosensors. Shraddha is Masters in Medical Technology student. So this is also one of the other unique programs started by IIT Jodhpur in 2020, where we have mix of students, right? 50% batches doctors, 50% batches engineers. Partly course is run in IIT, so they learn more engineering. Remaining immersion and hands-on they do in AIIMS Jodhpur. So that's how IIT and AIIMS Jodhpur together is running this program, and we are able to attract good students through this program. So where they learn how to develop a medical device. And Hari Om is in IIT Delhi. He's about to complete his work. He's into mechanical flow and mechanical engineering. And we have sponsors, thanks to BIRAC and SCRB. And I do a lot of work in IEEE that has already been told in my introduction. So in case anybody is interested in collaborating or finding out more about us, you can reach to us on our email address or look at our website and get more information. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for your attention. I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Professor Sakshi Danekar. It's an excellent session, and we are feeling like completely breathless after seeing the presentation. And now the forum is open for questions. There is a question in the chat box asked by Mr. Kalesh. By which method in alcohol detection sensor the interdigitated electrode pattern made? This was the question.
Which method in alcohol? Okay, so interdigitated electrodes were made using metal mask. Metal mask would mean that we use, so it's a prefabricated metal mask, and we would use the same in sputtering and then deposit chrome and gold using that. Because if we use lithography process, we could see that the layers, the sensing layers we already have were getting etched out. Yeah.
Okay, there is another question from Sriman Tatka. How advances in sensing technologies may impact society in the next 5, 10, 20 years?
Oh, a lot, I think. It is already showing its impact, I believe. Like I said in the beginning, that now we are so much dependent on sensors. And with now this IoT coming in, it seems like mostly the machines will be doing the talking and human beings would be just doing their jobs. So I think it will really bring a lot of impact in just coming 5 years. 20 years, I don't know what will happen. Maybe it'll be just AI and it'll be AR, VR all around us.
Is there any other question? One or two questions we can go last. Provided there is no further question, I would like to thank Professor Saksi for the exciting lecture and for being part of WSC 2022. Thank you very much, ma'am, for sparing your time and knowledge here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting. Yeah. Look forward to meet you sometime in person. Thank you.
Sure. Now the next session may be taken over by Dr. Karthik.
Good afternoon, everyone. Now this session 2 we are going to end. Next session, session 3, it will be a poster session. People can join for the next session shortly. There will not be any delay. So the concerned participants who are presenting the poster can join that particular session. Thank you all. And again, the technical session, we will start by 2 o'clock sharply.